Welcome back to Watercolours with Caroline. We are heading to Nova Scotia this week to paint a live lobster. This is a photograph by Selena Van Tassel. Thank you, Selena, for allowing us to use your photo. And on slightly bigger paper than usual, we want about 6.5 by 8.5. I'm allowing that extra ½ an inch for the tape because the bigger the paper, the stronger the hold you need with the tape. You'll also need some table salt, just ordinary salt for the background, and your paints and your brushes, and let's get painting. So I have my lobster here, and all this texture you can see in the background, that is the texture that the salt makes. And we're going to use 3 colors on the background and work on slightly wet paper. So not really wet, or our salt will dissolve and it won't work. And I also have some other colors here you can use if you don't have Cobalt Teal. So I've got a few here that will be substitutes you can make. You could use, if you have a turquoise or something like that, you can mix it with a bit of lemon and make a sort of a greeny cobalt color. Cerulean Blue is a lovely one. A little bit of phthalo green with it gets it very close to Cobalt Teal. Cerulean Blue and Lemon Yellow is a little bit kind of darker. It's still a good color. Phthalo Blue and Lemon Yellow, and Phthalo Blue, Lemon Yellow, and Cobalt Blue. And then I have one in my Gansai Tambi set that's called Malachite, which is really a beautiful color, but I mean, you may not have that. But any of these mixes, like cobalt with lemon, cerulean blue is lovely. And you can mix up these colors easily. So we're going to mix the colors first before we start. I'm going to mix up first some puddles of color before we start. So I'm going to put this here so I don't get paint on my drawing, and I've got paint on my thumb already. So first of all, I'm going to make a puddle of Cobalt Teal. And like I said, if you don't have this, just mix up something similar. You definitely don't have to have it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful color. It's lovely for oceans. If you do Caribbean oceans, those lovely kind of bluey green oceans, it's really beautiful for that. Cerulean Blue, I have 2 Cerulean Blues. I have one that is made by M. Graham, which is more of a true Cerulean Blue, which is this one I'm mixing up right now. And then I have a cheaper one that is made by Van Gogh Student Paints. It's made by mixing phthalo blue with white. They make it, I don't make it. And it's similar, but it's a little bit more green. And because it has white in, it's a little bit more opaque. But I'm still going to use some of it because it's rather beautiful color. And I also have a color called Sap Green. And I'm going to mix that with a little bit of yellow. No, I'm just going to use it now. I'm going to use it by itself and then mix some with the yellow. You can see we're making quite a few puddles here. Some sap green. And then right here, I have one from yesterday. I'm going to mix some. My Azo Yellow is the one that I like to use. Nice and bright and transparent. So I'm going to mix some green with some Azo Yellow. And I'm also going to mix some of this, what was this one? The wind's blowing so hard, it's interrupted my concentration. This was Cerulean Blue. And I'm going to mix a little bit of that with some yellow. So I've got lots of puddles of these bluey colors that I can use. And really, you know, it doesn't matter. You just need to have a nice selection of greens and yellowy greens and lovely blues, even if you just go with cerulean blue. So you just have a nice mixture to put in the background. Get my paper towel out the way. And now I want a biggish kind of a brush. I'm going to get my number 10, some clean water. And I'm not going to go too close to the lobster with my water. I want to sort of wet the corners and not too wet because I don't want the salt to really dissolve away into nothing. if it's too wet, but I do want working time and I do want those colors to blend wet in wet. So I'm going to switch to my number 8 brush, slightly smaller brush, because I want to get a little close to the lobster without going over the body. So I'm going to start with the Cobalt Teal and a little bit of water because it's not wet close to the body. And I'm going to have to be a little bit careful as I go close to the body, but you can see as it blends out into the water, it will start blending outwards and I don't have to worry so much. I get that on there. Now, go in this little space here carefully. And I want to switch to another color. I want to switch to this yellowy green that I've made. I'm just going to switch to that while this is all still wet. And you have to be careful to make sure you don't ever get a dry edge anywhere. And because it's dry close to the lobster, that's where you have to be most careful. So if you feel you've got a dry edge, you just need to take a wet brush and let's wet it up a little bit. I'm going to take my Cerulean Blue, which is slightly darker than these colors, and I'm going to put that on the corners. It's always lovely to have your corners a little bit darker to keep the view coming inwards. I'm going to go to my Sap Green, put my Sap Green next to that Cerulean. And this paper's wet, so you need me to just come in a little closer so you can see. Now I'm going back to my Cobalt Teal. And I have to be careful coming close to the lobster's body, just using the point of my brush to get in there. Back here with my Cobalt Teal. And anytime you feel that you've got a hard edge, like a dry edge, just get some wet paint or some water and just without having a big background happening, just wet it up a little bit. And I'm going to my very yellowy green. I'm going to have to, you know what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to turn my board because I'm not going to be able to get into these spots here. If I don't. And this is a time when I could easily lose my way and paint the lobster by mistake because I will lose track of what's where. I have to be really, really careful and think about what I'm doing. I've got some spots in here that I need a much smaller brush to get into. So I'm going to switch to my number 2 and my Cobalt Teal and just go into these little spots very carefully with my small brush. I'm going to switch from my Cobalt Teal to the yellowy green, so that what I don't want is I don't want one solid color in these little spots, which will look slightly weird if I have blended color in the other spots. So back to some green in here, again being careful and mindful of where the lobster is and where the background is. I'm going to a little bit of green. I'm going to grab some Cobalt Teal. And anytime you're working in these little spots, you don't have to hurry because they're pretty dry. And I've already just at this moment got to check that I haven't lost my way. Now, I'm going to stop for a minute. And up here at the top is starting to dry. And if I don't get my salt in right now, it's no point doing it. So I've got to, what I'm doing is I'm going to put a little bit of salt on my hand like this. I'm going to take a pinch like I'm going to season a stew. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of salt in that paint. And if your paint has dried too much, it won't work. If your paint is still really, really wet, it won't work. But I looked at mine and I could see it's starting to dry up. So this is a great time to sprinkle it on. It was a great time to stop because I can go back and wet this area and work on this area after I've sprinkled the salt. Now I've got a handful of salt that I have to put somewhere in the garbage can. That's where I'll put it. Here I have a garbage can. And I don't want to get it on my paper at this point. What I do want to do is, before I move on, is re-wet some of this area. This is starting to dry. And as I have no paint on this area, and a little bit in here, it's fine to add more water. It's just dangerous if you add water to paint that's on there. If you add it to paper that's drying, that's fine. It gives you a lot more working time if your paper is damp. There. Okay, I think that's enough there. Probably best to go into this area first. I'm going to go to my number 6 brush. It's still a bit tricky to get in there. Needs some more Cobalt Teal. And I'm going in here. If you miss any of these little areas, it's fine to put them in afterwards because they would be isolated. And let's go for some greens, some sap green. And it's fine to add color to isolated areas. And some of that yellowy green, some cerulean blue, just changing my color up. I don't wash my brush a lot of the time because that will put too much water on my paper if I wash my brush. So I just go into my puddle and pick up some color. Gone over that tongue a little bit. I can pick that up later. Now it's almost ready to put salt in that area, but I need to wait just a moment for that. A little bit more Cobalt Teal here in the claw. This is the pincher claw on this side. And on the other side is the crusher claw, apparently. I looked it up. This one seems to have great big molars in it, very big teeth. I would not like to get crushed by that crusher claw. I guess that's why they put those great big bands on them. Okay, now I've just got to stop for a minute and I have to sprinkle a little bit of salt in here because it's just getting to the stage where I need to get the salt in, just in the middle there. A bit of that out the way. Got this side of the claw. A little bit of green. And I'm almost there. Turn this around so I can do the other side. You can see what I'm doing. A little bit more Cobalt Teal. And I've already got some salt sprinkled in here. And I'm just grabbing from all my colors now, my green, the really light green, a little bit of the cerulean. I think there's a little leg just there. A bit closer there. All right, let's turn that back around. Move my camera slightly. And I can see just down this side is a little bit wet yet to put the salt in. If it's shiny and wet, the salt will just dissolve. It won't do any texturizing. It has to be just as the paint loses that wet shine, just as it starts to go a little bit sort of satiny, not dry yet. That's the perfect time to put your salt in. So I have to wait just a moment for these edges here. They're still a little bit wet. I can see this one's really, really shiny. This middle is getting, so you can't sort of paint the whole thing and do it all at the end because most of it will be too dry by then and the end bit will be too wet. So you'll get salt that doesn't work because it's too wet, and salt that doesn't work because it's too dry, and maybe just one or two places here and there that work. So it's a case of watching your paint and seeing that shine just start to disappear. It has to still have a little bit of a satin look to it. So I have to tip it a little bit. Now you can probably see with the light from the camera shining, this part is still very, very shiny, too wet for salt. This part up here, really shiny. The bits of salt that are in there just from a previous sprinkle, they will probably just dissolve away to almost nothing, and they won't have any effect on the paint. And this is actually something you can't be impatient with. You have to give it time to work and give it time to dry properly. I'm just putting a few of those salt grains in and getting rid of the rest. And then I'm going to put this to one side when we do our triads, and we'll come back to it for the rest of the lobster. I have a couple of swatches here of colors that I tried out, and you are welcome to use any orange that you have on your palette for this. Just so happens that transparent orange is my favorite because it is what it says, it's transparent, whereas most oranges that you buy are quite opaque, especially cadmium orange. It's quite a dense color, but that doesn't matter. You can try out any orange that you have, or you can mix an orange. So I've got quite a few mixes here. Your two likely ones that you might have are cadmium orange or transparent orange. You may have those, but if you don't have those, you could mix bright yellow, like my Azo Yellow, with a cadmium red, and you can see it makes a slightly duller orange than the other two, but it's still quite a nice orange. I have a quinacridone gold, which makes a transparent color. It's very transparent, and permanent rose is very transparent. So that is probably the closest to the transparent orange. If you have a quinacridone gold and you have a permanent rose or quinacridone rose, those two mixed together are going to make the closest one. I've also got a pyrrole red, which is quite transparent. And if I mix that with the quinacridone gold, that comes pretty close too. But you may not have a quinacridone gold because it's quite an expensive color. So, use one of these other mixes. This one is my Azo Yellow with quinacridone gold and quinacridone magenta. And that's a little bit yellowy, but of course you can modify that by getting a little bit more pink or magenta into it. And then I've got the Azo Yellow, Quin Gold, and Pyrrole Red in different strengths here. And I've tried them again over here to see what I can get. I've got the last one here. I've got Gamboge with quinacridone rose or permanent rose, and that's quite a nice, strong mix. I quite like that one. It's very close to the transparent orange, and the Gamboge and the quinacridone rose, which is also called permanent rose, are both pretty transparent, so they will make quite a transparent orange. So you decide. I looked at different strengths here of the quinacridone gold with the quinacridone magenta. The quinacridones are staining colors, very intense bright colors, and transparent colors. That's why I've chosen them for a lot of these oranges. They don't make such an opaque orange, but you use whatever you like for the orange bubble at the top. I'm just going to use my transparent orange. And down here, I'm going to use Winsor Lemon, or you can use lemon yellow, or you can use cadmium yellow light. If you have the lightest yellow that you have, if you don't have that, just use the yellow that you have. That's fine. And we're going to use ultramarine blue because we're going to use that to make our browns on our lobster. So I'll just zoom in a little bit. Come on, little camera. There you go. And I'm going to start, like always, with the lightest color, which is the lemon. So clean water, because lemon I've got lots of greens here that will make the lemon green very quickly. So let's get my lemon. Clean water, nice clean brush. Lemon is such a beautiful, bright color, and the Winsor lemon especially makes lovely, lovely cool greens and nice, really bright colors. So we're going to pop that lovely sort of transparent Winsor lemon right there. Sorry, it gets a little bit shiny in the camera lights, but I'll tip it a little bit. My transparent orange is made by Core, which is Golden paints. Golden make oil paints and acrylics, and when they make their watercolors, they call them Core. I don't know what it stands for, QOR, but very high quality paints. They have a secret formula they mix them with called Aquasol. So they don't use the traditional gum arabic and oxgall. They have made a synthetic binder called Aquasol, which is a secret recipe. We have no idea what's in it, but I have found it works really great. Look at that orange. I've never come across an orange so vibrant, so transparent, so gorgeous. In fact, I don't go out and buy oranges. This one came in a pack that I was given as a gift, so that's why I have it. And my cadmium orange, I just bought to show students what it looked like. I don't think I've actually ever used it. It just sits there in my palette. And ultramarine blue, which I use by the gallon, probably one of my most used colors, always having to buy more ultramarine blue. This particular one I just bought is M. Graham, the one that's made with honey. I couldn't get Winsor & Newton is my go-to one, but I couldn't get it. They didn't have it. So I picked up the M. Graham one, which is almost as good. Beautiful. The honey just makes the paint spread so beautifully, and it keeps it really moist in my tray. So there we go. There's the ultramarine blue. And we're going to start by mixing the lemon with the, well, let's mix the lemon with the blue. I always like to start at the bottom. I don't know why, it's just something I like to do. So I'm going to get my lemon first. Bring my tray over here so you can see my tray. Get the lemon. Okay, I'm going to just clean that little area up because it's getting contaminated with stuff here. I'm going to start again. Plenty of lemon, because I know the minute I touch that blue in there, it's going to, you'll have to gently get a tiny bit of blue, ultramarine, and that's good enough for the first one. I barely picked up any blue. And I think that's why a lot of beginners I see have trouble mixing greens. Their greens are always all the same color, same value. I think that they have not enough yellow in their greens and way too much blue or green in them. It's incredible how much yellow you need to get a nice light spring green. And that one is beautifully transparent because the lemon is so transparent. And another bit of blue, tiny little bit, teeny bit of blue for the mid one. Maybe have a touch more. For my middle bubble here. Still a very transparent green. And then a little bit more blue for the darkest one. And I think when people are mixing greens, they tend to go too dark too quickly and miss out all the yellow stages. And you'll be able to compare, if you do have a lemon or a cadmium yellow light or a light one, you'll be able to compare these greens to the ones that you mixed with the darker yellow last week. We have the 3 there, and now we're going to mix them. You're not going to see a big difference with the transparent orange because they are similar colors. What do you call them? Oh, my brain just can't think of words when I'm painting. Analogous. They sit close to each other on the color wheel, so they're analogous. A little bit more clean lemon and a little touch of, I have to be careful, that transparent orange just floods, it just flooded into that yellow the minute I touched it in there. And this is just slightly tinted. Now, this is very close to a gamboge as you add this orange, but more transparent than a gamboge. Let's get a tiny bit more orange. And try the middle bubble. Because the lemon's so light, all these colors will be very light. I think I've got too much already there. Let's go back to a bit more lemon. Dilute that out a little bit. And then a little bit more orange. The orange is so strong that with just the slightest touch, it's overpowering the yellow very quickly. Put that one up there. And you can see there's not much of a difference because they are pretty close to each other. And let's try coming down from the orange to the blue. Clean that little piece there. I'm not going to clean up all my other oranges because I'm going to need those for the lobster body. I'm starting with orange. And then I'm going to get a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of blue. Ooh. Hard to get a tiny bit. Let's go back and get a bit more orange. The blue will start to turn it quite brown quite quickly. So if you have too much blue, you have to go back and get more orange so that you've got the correct mix. So we've got something almost like a burnt sienna here. And it will also granulate a little bit because the ultramarine blue always granulates. So you've got almost a burnt sienna substitute right there. What am I picking up now? I'm picking up blue. A little bit more. So now if we put this in, we've got a brown that's more like a burnt umber. See how quickly we made a brown there. And we'll be making the brown for most of the lobster body for the shadows. And then a little bit more ultramarine blue is going to take us into a much deeper brown, depending on how much blue we add, of course. It's almost a gray. So this is trying to think which brown is like this. Or sepia. Sepia is very much like this. I think sepia quite often has some black in the mix to make it a very dark brown. But all of these will come out a little bit more transparent because of the transparent orange than buying a tube of sepia or a tube of burnt umber or a tube of burnt sienna. Although I love my burnt sienna, I wouldn't be without it. Beautiful, beautiful grays and browns there. So now when we've done those ones, we are going to try it's going to be very difficult to get an equal mix to see what we can make with getting an equal mix of those three colors. So we just have to try and get an equal amount on the brush, starting with the yellow. You've got to start there first. So I'm going to like swish my brush in the yellow, swish my brush in the orange. I'm going to give it a little clean before the blue. Swish my brush in the blue and try and get the same amount and a little bit of water so I can get it to flow onto my book. And we have a very beautiful beautiful gray, almost a greenish gray. And imagine doing the darks on forest greens. If you've got the lovely, imagine you've got the lovely bright forest green and you've got some mid-tones and dark tones, and then you come into those dark spots with this color. How amazing that looks. You don't need much dark to really set off your light colors. I'm just gonna dilute that out with a little bit of water and see how that looks as a light gray. Very, very pretty. This is how you make dark colors. You don't use black unless you really want to. If I really want black, I will use some ink, some Sumi ink or something that has a lovely shiny, intense black. But if I want black paint, I will mix these triads of colors. So now I want one that's mostly blue. So I'm going to get a tiny touch of lemon, a little tiny touch of lemon, little tiny touch of kind of tip of my brush of orange. And then I'm going to get a big, big brush load of blue and try that out. That is even closer to black than this lovely greeny gray color. And of course, depending on whether you want a thick black or a transparent black, that's when you choose your base colors carefully. This transparent orange and lemon yellow are going to give you a pretty transparent black. The ultramarine blues is a semi-transparent color and a granulating color. So it will give you a little bit of coverage and it will give you a little bit of texture. If you want a non-granulating black, then you need to go to phthalo blue instead. That will be intense. It will be transparent and it will not granulate. It will be different. This one, you will start to see the granulation happening as it starts to dry, which is incredibly pretty. This is really, really pretty color here. Right, we're gonna, I know I've put red, I always put red or yellow, but we're gonna use the orange as our main color in this one here. A little bit of lemon, tiny bit of lemon, tiny bit of blue, and then a nice big brush load of orange. And we're probably just gonna have one of those browny, orangey colors. Let's be slightly grayed down. That over here, a bit lighter. And the last one, we want mainly yellow in the last one, which is going to be very difficult because the yellow is a weak color compared to the other two. So let's start with some orange. Brush tip of orange, brush tip of blue, and then a big, big brush full of yellow. And we're going to get a rather olivey, very olivey green color. Very vegetable-y kind of a green. Going to dilute that out a little bit with some water. And that's all diluted out. Now I did forget, I always forget to put the dilutions on the edges, the diluted with water ones, but I won't bother today, but I do try and do that if I'm concentrating, seeing what the diluted paint looks like. I think this is a beautiful triad for painting with, and especially if you added the phthalo blue as well to this, so that you could have some transparent, very, very transparent darks and grays, as well as the little bit more opaque and granulating ones that the Ultramarine Blue gives you. Okay, so we will go back to, I'm sure you're catching up and experimenting. I'm going to look at my Lobster. Let's pull back the camera a little bit. I'm going to look at my Lobster, see how he's doing. And check out my salt. Put my book to one side. Well, the salt's looking okay. I have a little bit that's not dissolved. Well, you know what? Mine isn't quite dry yet either. There's still a wet part here. But we're going to have to rush him because we're on a time schedule. And I got impatient and put it on too soon down this side, but it's again because we're on a time restriction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute because I'm going to use my head dryer and I don't want you to have your ears blasted. Mute my microphone. Now, once you've made sure that your background is dry, and I made sure that I brushed off, like I said, I've got really impatient with waiting for it down here. So I pushed it a little hard and I didn't get the salt on exactly right, but that's okay. It's all dry now. And we're going to work just on the Lobster body, and we're working in layers. So the very first layer, we are putting on all of the orange and the pinky orange and the raw sienna colors. We're putting all of the light colors on first. We're not worried about any of that dark brown. We're going to color the whole Lobster with the light yellows and oranges and beige colors before we do all the brown work. The brown work's going to be done on dry paint. It's easier than it looks. And all the oranges are going to be done on dry paper, but you're going to let them sort of blend wet and wet, like you let this blend wet and wet, but the paper won't be wet. You're going to have dry paper. And I forgot to mention that I use some masking fluid on the teeth, and they literally are, I think, teeth on this crusher claw. And some of the little spikes, there's like little teeth on the carapace all over the place and spikes. I used a little bit of masking fluid on those before I started. You don't have to. It's just as easy to come in at the end with some white paint, or I prefer Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's nice and bright and water soluble and easy to use. So either one is good, but I have put on a little bit of masking fluid, just so that I can keep a few very light areas. But like I say, doing the white afterwards, that's fine, that's great. My little Lobster here, my little guy. And I need to get some colors ready again because I'm going to work on dry paper. So I want some light colors and some medium colors and some bright colors. And one of the ones I want is my raw sienna. So I want to make sure I have that ready for the lightest parts of the body. So let's get some raw sienna here, ready to dip into. And I'm going to use my transparent orange as well. So I'll grab some of that. This was one of my mixes I had here, so I'll just mix it in with that. It'll be fine. Actually, I think this is the first thing, this Lobster is the first thing I've ever painted that really needed something like the transparent orange that I have. I've never really used it for anything much before. And I'm going to also get some raw sienna mixed with rose. Now, I don't know how many of you have something that has rose in its name: quinacridone rose, permanent rose, rose doré. But a rose of any type will be good. I'm going to use my permanent rose, and I'm going to mix a bit of that with my raw sienna to make a pinky beige sort of color for some of the places. And I'm going to do some, oh, I need a lot of space here. Probably already forgotten what I said I'm doing. It's on your notes. The next one is some Azo Yellow or cadmium yellow, whatever you have, bright yellow. And I'm going to add some raw sienna to that. So I have a yellowy raw sienna. So it's not so earthy, but more yellowy. So we have those colors all ready to go, and I definitely need to have them ready. Now I need to get my reference photo in front of me so that I can see where I want to have my colors. And I can see on this crusher claw on this side, it's quite orange. So I want to make sure I put my orange there. But on this side, on the pincher claw here, it's very raw sienna-ish. On this leg here, it's very raw sienna-ish. On the head and the tail, it's more orangey. So I kind of want to use different colors on different parts of this lobster. And I'm debating what size brush to use because I don't want to get too twee with my paint, but I don't want to get over the edge either and into my blue. So I'm gonna stick with my number 8 and see how I go. I might have to switch to my number 6. All right, so let's bring my little guy across here, bring this over here. So I'm going to start with my raw sienna, and I want to do this part of the leg, claw, front leg. It's called the carpus. I looked it up. This is called the carpus. I want to do the whole thing of this and right across the mouth area here with this raw sienna. We're going to come over with the brown afterwards, so don't worry about it. As I come down this area, I'm using the raw sienna that I mixed with rose. I'm getting a little bit warmer in color. Coming around here. And now I want to go to the transparent orange for this area. I want this to come, because it's in the foreground, it's a main part of the painting. I want it to come forward. I forgot the blue. Well, it's too late now, Caroline. You've forgotten the blue, so you can't go back. What I was going to put in was around this area was a little bit of blue. I'll do it on the other side. There was some highlights there, which I can, now I've forgotten it, I can mix a little bit of blue with the white after I'm finished, and I can put it in at the end. I will do it on the left side. There's so much to remember before you start painting so often. I'm just going to wash out my brush, and I'm going to get my little number 2, and I'm going to put on the other side, I'm going to put that blue on first. So I'm going to use Cerulean Blue. If I can find it, there it is. Or you can use the Cobalt Teal, doesn't matter. They're both a lovely light blue and a lot of water. And I'm going to put that on over here first, because there's some very light areas that sort of are reflecting blue light there. Now this side was very raw sienna-ish, the color of this pincher claw. So while I've got that blue in, I can drop water there. I'm going to put the raw sienna in. If I want more color afterwards, I can put it in a second layer. And I got a little bit of the pinky raw sienna for the tip of this claw. I'm getting my hand closer to the tip of my brush for control. I'm bringing it in here, a little bit of dark in here. And I also want to do that pinky. I'm going to get a little bit more rose now, a little bit more rose into that. I've just added a bit more into the raw sienna. The top seems to be a lot more pink. And I'm going to put the pinky color along the top here. All these colors will dry so much lighter. I'm going to take some of the orange, the top here. I've missed quite a bit of blue in there, so I will put that in later. I'm going to put orange on this side. And raw sienna. A bit of water on my brush, raw sienna on this side. And this little leg, there's a little bit of leg sticking out here. Back to my raw sienna for this part here. And back to the orange for the part that sticks out just here. And it's lovely if they blend wet in wet, that's great. I'm going to take the rose and the orange. I've got the rose and the orange together for this bit here. Picked up some rose and some orange, get that a little bit intense down here. It really doesn't matter what colors you use, as long as you use like all these beautiful colors. How they turn out will be just a joy and a colorful lobster. I'm going to make sure I get this leg. There's one leg coming from under him here, or her. And I want the raw sienna small brush for what I think is, I think from looking it up, I think here at the front is the mouthpiece, the sort of what it eats with, just coming along here. And these, I think they said these, and oh, these antennules that come out the front, they smell. I guess they search around for food. The legs are mainly sort of raw sienna-ish color, have a lot of brown on them. Underneath, I mean, not on top. This is all the underneath colors. We will be painting the top colors when these are dry. The lobster tail at the back is quite orangey, but I'm going to use the raw sienna and rose mix because I don't want them to come forward as much as the claws. So these are the edges of the tail at the back here, the bits that stick out either side. And I'm going back to my raw sienna for the legs. Yeah. We can't see all of the legs there. Some of them are under the body, so we can't see them all. There's one here, there's one here, 1, 2, and there's one sort of here, one here. One back there. And now I want, I'll switch back to one of my bigger brushes. I want mostly raw sienna for the back, the carapace. And when it comes over to like the right side, I'm going to grab some orange mixed with a bit of rose. I'm going to have the right side a little bit more orangey, rosy orange. And coming up towards the head, I'm going to use that rosy orange. So it's the transparent orange, a little bit of rose in it, just mixing a little bit more up. And I'm going to come over the eyes. There's sort of a protective area over the eyes. And this is an area that comes, a little area that comes down the front here. And then I'm going back to the raw sienna for the part under the eyes. Now you could go right over the eyes at this point if you wanted. I'm going to, I think, leave mine, and I'll come in with one of my dark mixes like we made in the triad to put the eyes in. Now you can paint right over the antennas if you want. I've kind of left mine to put in later. It doesn't matter. We're going to go in with some dark. Now you'll see I've got a white spot right here where I forgot to put my blue in. I don't want to do that right now, or all my orange will bleed out into my blue. So I'm going to wait and do that when everything is dry and not worry about it. A little bit of tail sticking out there. And take a little bit more color over here. I'm just looking to see if there's any areas that need a bit more color and before it's dry. Put a little bit of rose on this area here. A little bit of rose on this area here. And this sort of thing sticking out here. And that's pretty much my first layer of color. And it looks very, very much like the cooked lobster, the boiled lobster, when it's this color. And we'll get the brown over the top. So while you catch up, I'm gonna let my paint soak in a little bit while you catch up. And then I will dry it with the hairdryer because it needs to be dry before I put all of this brown detailing on there, and maybe a little bit of dark red detailing. We've got to get this area dry. And I also want to just fill in this little bit of blue that I missed. So I'll mute my microphone. So I am going to I want to put the eyes in at this point, just so they're there. And I'm going to make a nice dark color using the orange I have here. Move this over a little bit. And the ultramarine blue. Grab my little brush. I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. And get a bit more orange so it's nice and intense. And I could add a little bit of phthalo blue just to intensify it a little bit more. More orange, a bit more ultramarine. Now I haven't added much water to this. You can probably see how dark this is. And I just would like to get the eyes in. So it helps to get a really good dark in there. So I can just sort of see what that's going to look like. And compare all the other colors I'm going to do to the dark that's in there. Also, it kind of makes it look a little bit more lifelike. So if you want that mix again that I used the transparent orange that I had, probably had a bit of rose in it, ultramarine blue, and a tiny bit of phthalo blue as well to get a good intense black color for the eyes. And I will put a little white light on this one with my PH Martin's white when it's all done. I've got those in. So I can see what my darkest dark is going to be on here. Now you can use any colors to mix your browns, but probably the ones that you have that are most useful on your palette, especially if you don't have the transparent orange, is the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue. They mix. I'm just going to put them all here, right here with the orange that I have, because I just want to mix a lovely dark brown. So I'm going to use my burnt sienna and my ultramarine blue with all the oranges that I have there. And that's mixed a lovely dark brown. And I want a brown that's not quite so dark. So over here where I got my raw, you don't have to mix them with your raw sienna, but it means you don't have to clean your raw sienna up either if you have it there. And I'm going to mix a little bit of ultramarine blue with that, so I have a lighter brown, a bit more burnt sienna. I got a light brown, a really intense brown, and I can also mix, let's turn this around a little bit. I can mix a very cool brown with the burnt sienna again and phthalo blue, if you have a phthalo blue. Mix a really, really dark, intense brown. A little bit of the ultramarine as well. So really, really good and dark. So I've got a few varieties of brown here that I can use, and I can also just have burnt sienna for a nice reddy brown. I'll have it there. What I like is a number of colors on my palette that I can just dip my brush into as I go, so I can make decisions as I go, and I've got them all there. And what I have in front of me at all times is I have the painting, the photo, the reference photo right in front of me, and kind of see exactly what I want to do. Now I'm going to start right back here at the end of the body, the abdomen. It's furthest away from me so I don't get my hand in it, and it's pretty cool and dark back here, so I'm going to use the blue that I made with the phthalo in it. But if you don't have phthalo blue, you can use Prussian blue. If you don't have those, you can just use the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, or ultramarine and Payne's gray. Any of those dark blues or grays will work. I'm going to start back here. I think I'm going to use my number 4 brush. I want it fairly small, but not too small. And this is the mix I made with the phthalo blue, a little bit of ultramarine and the burnt sienna. And it's cooler. Phthalo blue is a little bit cooler. So I'm going to start right back here with that. And I'm going to put and I'm painting in the direction of the body. The body comes around, it comes around in sections. So I want to paint it in sections. And there's kind of a light spot here, and then it goes a little lighter down this side of this section. I'm going to the raw sienna, burnt sienna lighter mix to go down this side. Again, it really, like, what mix you use is not as important as the value, how light or dark it is, because every lobster that comes out of the sea is going to be slightly different. The lighting for the photograph is going to be slightly different. So it's not important exactly what color you have, but what value you have, whether it's very dark or slightly dark. Now, on top of the body, I got my number 2 brush. On top of the body here, because the body is shiny, there's a little highlight, and I'm going to lift that out with a thirsty brush, which is a clean brush that's a little bit wet. I'm just going to pull a little bit of the paint off on the top there. Now, because we have the orangey color underneath, that's still going to give color rather than just white paper. And you'll see that it will just sort of flood back in a little bit after I've lifted, and won't be too obvious. So let's go back to my 4 brush. and get that paint same color. And I'm going to come along the next section. And I want to leave just, if you can see, I'm leaving, I'm going to zoom in even more. I'm leaving just the thinnest line between these sections of the body. You can't really see that very well in the photograph, but for my painting, it's going to give that idea that there's sections of the body, and it's going to help delineate them. Come down the side, and again, I'm going to go to my smaller brush and my lighter brown for the left side of the body. And I've put masking fluid, this little white parts on there, I've put masking fluid there. And again, where that highlight is, clean brush, dry my brush off on my paper towel. And I'm just going to take a little bit of highlight off the top of the body. Third one along. Again, you try and leave just the thinnest line between the sections. And coming down the side. Sorry if I go quiet, I really have to concentrate sometimes on what I'm doing. Lighter on this side. And highlight on the top. Lifting out highlights is way easier than trying to paint them in, especially with something this small. Something much bigger, you could wet it first and leave the highlight, but just lifting them out is much, much easier. Okay, so we're I think there's like 3 sections, and then we're at the main part of the body. So I'm going to switch to my ultramarine blue mix as I get closer, and it's getting a little warmer. And I'm going to switch to a slightly bigger brush. I've got my number 6 here. Get my brushes where I can find them. So I'm switching to the medium mix, which is the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna and any orange I have left over. And I want to get the main part of this in. Now, over here, it's kind of mottled. So to get a mottled look, I can have a brush that's almost dry, and can sort of drag that brush over there, not quite painting some of the areas over here. This is called a dry brush technique. I'm going to kind of just not have thick paint over there. I get a bit of mottling. And then thicker. And again, I go a little bit quiet as I'm trying to focus on what I'm doing. As I come to the top of the head here, I want to get some rose and orange, and I want to sort of intensify the top of the head with some rose and some orange, and let them go wet in wet with my dark brown. Go back to my dark brown. And there's some little areas around the eye here, little eye protecting areas. And this is mottled, so I'm just going to like tip the top of my brush, tip of my brush, to indicate some of this mottling around the eye. Now it's very easy to just keep painting around the body and forget to sort of stop and mottle some areas, because this area around the eye here is not as dark as the body. So you have to kind of stop and work that area differently. And you're working on dry paper. You don't have to rush. It's not critical that you rush anything. And on top of the head here, just going to, I put that red and orange on there. I'm just going to lift a tiny bit out with the tip of my brush to kind of mottle that area as well. Now, the good thing is if you get some sort of weird wet and wet things happening, it's just going to look like the mottling on the lobster anyway. I'm switching back to my number 2 brush because I want to use the lighter brown that I mixed, and I want to take it in here. So I have that kind of orange around the eye. And some shadow under here. And I'm just going like dip, 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 dip with the tip of my brush to get that in. So it's and I'm going into slightly darker brown, just close to this antenna, a little more shaded, the edge of the body here. I'm going to use my wet brush to just blend that in a little bit. And eventually, when this area on top of the head is dry, I'm going to take a line, just a line down the center here. It's kind of like a little line here, but I'm going to wait till everything's dry to put in those kinds of details. They're extra details you can put in later. Now you're going to sort of do the same procedure with everything, putting on the dark. You can start with the legs at the back here. Now the legs are pretty basic. Just, you know, I'm just using my basic burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, brown, and they don't have a lot of mottling or anything on them. It is nice to show the sections of the leg by having a dry spot between them, a little dry line between them. It shows each leg is sectioned here. They come down to quite a little pointy tip at the bottom. The edges of the tail have a dark brown sort of edge to them. I'm going to use my wet brush to just soften that edge just a little bit. Got a little wet brush, just so that edge of the tail is not too sharp a line. Same with this edge here. Put it in, put some of the shadow in, and then take my wet brush, dry it off a little bit, and just use the tip of my wet brush to just soften that line. So it's not, you don't want lines that are at the back of the body to be as obvious as the lines that are at the front. Otherwise it draws your attention too much to areas that are not as important. The important area, I think, are the front claws. For me, that is like your focal point. And of course the eyes. But you don't want to spend a lot of time doing detail on areas close to the back. So I'm going to the leg on the other side. So it's just my mid-brown again. And I'm leaving quite a bit of the raw sienna showing on the tip of that, I guess it's a knee sort of a part. And same here, I'm sort of going to put the brown on the underside and leave some of that raw sienna showing, even like mottling it a little bit, just tipping it with the tip of my brush. Same with this leg. Now the legs are coming towards you now, so you can add a bit more detail as they come towards you. I want the slightly lighter brown. I want to leave a dry area between the two. And I'm going to get the darker brown that I made. And while this is still sort of wet, I'm just going to tip the darker brown into the wet brown, just carefully with the tip of my brush. Light brown again. I'm going to get the light brown for this part of the leg. Take a wet brush and just blend that in. And I'm not going to do the mottling yet because it's still quite wet. I'll come back and do the mottling in just a minute or two. And then this part of the leg. And down. And there's a leg just sticking out here. Bung that in. That doesn't need much detail at all. So I'm going to the darkest brown that I made with the Phthalo blue. And now this one is just dried slightly. Dried enough to put some mottling in. I'm going to put a few little dots with the tip of my brush. Some shadows close to the joints. It's darker, just where the joints come in. Anytime you put mottling on paint that's too wet, it's just going to dissolve into the paint, which makes it nice and soft, but sometimes you want to go back and add a little bit more after the paint's dried a bit. That's enough. We don't need a huge amount of detail for these legs. It's good enough. And I've put this color on this leg back here, quite strong. And I just want to take a little bit off just to give a bit of a highlight here, which is easy to do if you've mixed ultramarine with your burnt sienna. They're very, very easy to lift. So I just want to give a little highlight to that area. I still haven't done all the detail around the face and the eyes. That's kind of your finishing detail that you come to right at the very end when you want to add just a little bit more to everything, but we've got quite a bit to work on. Coming forward to the claws, and I'm going to mix up a bit more. Oh, I've got water all over my photo. I'll mix up a little bit more brown. It's kind of getting a bit dried up, so I need to add a bit more water to my paint. Let's zoom out so you can just see me mixing. First of all, I want my raw sienna mix. Raw sienna, a tiny bit of burnt sienna to make a lightish brown. Second one is burnt sienna with ultramarine blue to make my mid brown. It's sort of general, very easy to lift brown if I want to be lifting off paint at any time. It's a nice one to do that. And then the third one, I want my burnt sienna and a much cooler, darker brown. So I got burnt sienna with this time phthalo blue. Makes it much darker, and a little bit of ultramarine just to warm it up a touch. A bit more burnt sienna, a bit more phthalo blue. Gives me a lovely cool dark brown if I need that. And we are going to work our way forward towards the front claws. Well, let me grab the right size brush. I think my number 4. And underneath the mouth area is quite intense and dark. So I'm going to use my darkest one here. And come under here with that dark one I made with the phthalo blue. There's a little bit of mottling here, so I'm just going to use the tip of my brush as I mottle. There are lots of like sort of clawy type teeth things sticking out. And I think I have used masking fluid on a lot of them, but I might want to just make sure that I leave some of them. Going into my I have some just pure burnt sienna over here, and I notice on top of here it's quite reddy brown on the top. So I'm switching just to that. That's why I have all these puddles right here. I'm just switching to the burnt sienna there. And again, there's mottling on the top of this claw. So I have to sort of be careful I don't just paint over everything. Going into my smaller number 2 brush, my mid brown, and all this area is kind of mottled. So I'm just painting in bits of brown. Very reddy brown on the top. Be careful when you come down to this area here. This is like a very, very reddy orange piece that sticks out over the claw. So coming back down with the mottling and to a nice edge. Like even though I've got a lot of mottling there, I just want to make sure I have a nice edge before the next part of the claw gets painted. Back here, I think, is another leg back here. I want to do that when this part is dry. I want a much lighter brown here for the tongue. I think it's tongue or mouthpiece here. I want to put the lighter brown on there. And as it comes towards the end, it's darker, but I'm going to use just the burnt sienna for the end here. And I'm also going to get a little bit of rose, because it's also quite a reddy color. So I've got rose on my little number 2 brush, and I'm going to drop some rose in at the end of the tongue here. It looks quite bright when you put it in, but it dries quite a lot lighter or less intense. Now we have a leg back here. Just using my mid brown for this one. Can't really see it, it's in shadow underneath, so you don't need to really pay too much attention to this one. Then it will disappear under the body. Pop it in one go. And as you come down the claw, that's when you're going to have to pay much more attention to what you're doing. You're going to have to paint more carefully. Probably just wondering whether to do this top claw first before we do the under part. It's kind of, it's very rosy, the top part of this claw. So I want to get some rose, just rose by itself. I'm running out of palette space. And along the top of this claw here, I'm going to paint some rose. And before that dries, I have to come in with my darker paint. So I'm going to get my medium brown and bring this in and just let it blend into that rose I've put on there. Get a little bit of the just burnt sienna, put that in too. And go into my very dark brown. Now as it comes around here, it's very, very dark. Comes next to this, what looks like a big sort of ligament type area where it opens and closes. Now the dark brown mix should be mixing wet in wet with that rose. And if you find it's mixing too much, you can just use what's called a thirsty brush, which is a clean, damp brush, and you can just pull it back a little bit if you feel like it's getting away from you. But don't pull too much of it off of there, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how it turns out. It's going to be what it is. And whatever it is going to look like a lobster. So don't panic too much if you think it's spreading too much into that claw. Now the same thing, we're going to do the same thing here. There's a big highlight of reddy orange here, and I'm going to just wet that a little bit. Get my rose, just put a bit of rose on here. We don't want too much. We don't want it like overpowering. We want to see the orange underneath. So I'm going to put my rose on here. So we get that rosy glow, and here, a bit of a rosy glow here. And then I'm going to get my medium brown, bigger brush. I've got to go to my number 6, switch to my number 6. Mix up a little bit more brown. And start getting your nice dark brown on. If your brown is kind of diluted because you've been using it a lot, then mix up some before you start. Now what I want in this mottled area here is a soft look. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water here so that I get a soft mottled look there. And before this rose dries too much, I want to come along and come either side of this rosy part here. And make sure that the rose mixes wet in wet with my dark brown. Be very careful as you get to the end of the claw that you get the point of your brush in there and get a nice dark, nicely shaped tip to the claw. And I have to work pretty fast now because I don't want to have that rosy area drying up before I can get the rest of this nice dark brown in. If it's not dark enough on your first go round, you can come round with more on your second go. That's fine. And now this area has dried up a little bit, so I can come in with a little bit more mottling. Around here. And already this is drying a little bit, so just want to get a little bit more dark in before it dries too much. Wash my brush, and I have a leg back here that I think everything back there is dry enough that I can put a lightish brown leg in back here. I'm going in with the lighter brown mix. Put that in. Now you probably find that it might not be dark enough on this top claw, but that's when you can go in with a third layer of a few darks. It depends how wet or dry it is. If it's drying up too much, you probably can't get them in there, but I think mine is just wet enough that I can just put a bit more shadow and mottling in this top one. And we're getting there. We're almost there. We've got to get the other claw in, and then just a few details around the mouth, and we're getting close to done. So it's kind of the same procedure on this leg. Start over by the mouth area and start with your medium brown. Wet this area to mottle, and then wet this area to get your brown in so that it blends wet and wet like the rosy side did. But I need to mix up a bit more. Paint. And this is a great time to stop and mix some paint up, because I'm not trying to do wet and wet at this point. Middle mix is the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue. A lovely mix that you can lift, you can wash off. You can vary from dark brown to dark gray. It's great mix. I still have quite a bit of the raw sienna mix, but I might make a little bit more raw sienna with a bit of burnt sienna just to get a light brown. And then this one here, burnt sienna with the phthalo blue to make it much darker than the other one, and a touch of ultramarine blue just to warm it up a little bit. Of course, you could use other browns, you could use other grays. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just doing best practice here, which is trying to use what you've got in your limited palette of colors for your painting, to just use those colors rather than have to go into 7, 8, 9, 10 different colors. And to just teach you that you don't have to buy loads of colors. You're fine with just a few. You can mix a lot of different colors with just a few. So I want to go into my darkest one by the body here. And there's not too much mottling here. And if I wasn't struggling with trying to keep it on camera, I would probably turn my board, but I don't want to right now. Let's keep it the right way up. And if I forgot to do these claws with the masking fluid, I'm going to come in with the white paint when I'm finished and put them in. It's often much easier. You get a nicer finish. There's some quite light brown near the mouth here. I'm just going to put that on wet and wet, just some light brown here. And then dark under. There's also some kind of like white areas that look a bit like teeth here. No idea if that's what they are, but I'll just pop those in. And then mottle a little bit of dark on the sort of mouth area here. Dark under there. And I'm going to lift just a little bit of color just off the top here, just to give it a little bit of definition. Now the next one has quite a lot of mottling on it, so I'm going to wet this area first, just in the middle, just here. And then get my very dark brown, which is the one that I mixed with phthalo blue. And I'm going to start on the driest area that I have here. And again, be careful of this little area right here. This is sort of a little reddish area that sticks out. So don't paint that with your dark paint. And as my paint hits the water that I put on there, it will start to spread. And I'm going to use that to mop up a little bit of that color. And then I'm going to put the mottling in as I kind of mop up a little bit of the wet. Let it soften the color I've put on. Want it good and dark under here where I'm painting right now. Lots of paint. Good and dark around here. And then this area is still a little wet to put a bit more mottling in, but as that starts to dry up, I will put the mottling in this area here. I'm just going to have to keep an eye on it so that I put it in at the right time. Has to be damp, just starting to dry, and then I can put the mottling in so it's a little bit softer. The same with this side. I'm going to wet. I'm going to wet just here. I'm going to go to my medium brown. I'm actually going to add a little bit of rose to that medium brown because it's warmer on this side, the brown. I just added a little bit of rose to it to warm it up. And I'll take that along here. And on the top here. And we're going to come to another highlight. I don't want to go too far. There's some of those teeth sticking up. I kind of think I did mask those off with masking fluid. And there's a very light area here. And I'm going to put that mottling in. And I'm going to go back and put some of this in too. I think this is just about getting to the right wetness that it will stay. That in. Now there's a big highlight down the side of this claw. So I want to put water in here to keep that highlight. There's also a highlight here, put some water there. And then get my mid brown and avoid that little bit of highlight that I put in with the blue and come along the edge. And I want the paint to just flood up into that area of wet that I just put there. There's also a highlight along the edge of the claw here, which I think I'm going to have to lift out. It's going to be easier, I think, to lift it out. I've got my smaller brush and lift the paint along here just to get it lighter. On this edge where I wet it, I'm just going to soften that by lifting with my slightly wet brush. And this light area, again, my slightly wet brush is going to soften that area. A little bit of a shadow here and here. There's like a claw shape here and definite shadow there. like along the edge of things, always pretty dark shadow along the edges. Now I've also got to put shadow inside this claw as well. And I want to mix even more rose with the color because it's very rosy sort of color inside here. So I've got my mid brown and I'm going to mix some rose with that and some orange with that. I've got a rosy orange, dark rosy orange brown, which is going to be very useful for a few of the parts. And want to put this in the claw area here. There's a little like tooth sticking up that I think I have, I've blocked off, but I'm going to paint around it just in case I didn't. And as that comes up to the tip here, it's very light rosy color that comes up to the tip. So I want to get a watered down rose and put the watered down rose here. Just bring it to that darker color. Having trouble getting watery enough. I'm just bringing it so it just meets that darker color. And while this is still wet, I'm taking the very dark brown and putting that in here where there's more shadow. Just where the claw opens. Everything's still wet, so it's easy to put extra color in to shade that. That's the like phthalo blue brown, really dark one back here. And the top of this claw, like the top of the other one, is quite a pinky color. So I'm going to use this pinky brown that we just mixed up, and I'm going to put that on. It's probably not pinky enough. I'm going to add a bit more pink to it. A bit more pink to that pinky brown on the top here. And then go in with the much darker brown. So you kind of have the darker brown along the edge and the more pinky brown on the top. You can also have the darker brown along the top edge as well. Kind of, there is some shadow there coming down. Kind of a little bit mottled here. Now, anytime you feel that you've not got enough mottling, that it's dried quite light, you can go back and do some more. I've just got a little bit of that darker brown on my brush, and I feel like I could have a bit more mottling along here now that this is drying up. And I can put that in, and a bit more shadow on this side. And a bit more here, need a bit more definition here maybe. And I feel like I can bring this dark forward a little bit too. So we're almost done. Like we've got most of the detail on. There's a couple of things that I need to add detail to. I need that very pinky color for the antenna that I've sort of just left here to last. My very thin liner brush, I'm going to pull that pinky brown up here for those antenna. And this There's one that comes the other side. Very thin at the end, getting thicker towards the head. And then there are some much reddier ones, what they're called the antennulars, the smelling ones. They're almost red, so I'm going to use the orange and the rose. If I can find a single spot here to do that with. Let's get some clean area. So let's have a little bit of the rose and a little bit of the orange. And I'm going to make, with those two, I'm going to make a really, so you can use any red that you like any red that seems bright red to you. You can use it, because these ones are quite red that come from the mouth area for this, for smelling. There's one here, one here. I think they have a few of them. I think they have two on each side of the mouth, as far as I know. I think there's one here. It's just a little bit blurred. And I just want a bit more darkness on this one. I think I've got some masking fluid on that one. I'll get those in. Really looks nice with that. That's the transparent orange with the rose. Makes a rather lovely color. I'm going to use that color to accentuate these little red areas here. And there's another really red one on the other side. And there's a sort of a little red pointy thing on the side of the bit that sticks out over the eyes. Maybe a little bit of red under the eyes. This is at the time when you can do all the fine details. There's some little red claws here and there. Some of these claws have got red around them too, but in something this small, it's really difficult to do that kind of detail. And what I do need is that I'm going to get my liner brush in the very dark. There's a line down the center there. I'm just putting that on with my line brush. It's very, very faint. Now I'm going to get my really tiny brush. I have a 000. I'm going to use my really dark brown that I mix with my 000 brush. And I just want to do some details around the eyes with this. A little bit of detail around here. I'm just looking at my picture, putting in a bit more detail. A little bit more mottling, a bit more dark on this side of the eye. There's kind of, there's sort of little eye protectors that go up the top of the eye. And around the mouth, get my medium brown, I've got a little bit left. Just around the mouth here, there's a little bit more shadow that I can put in around here. And maybe a bit more under this area. And sometimes it's a really good idea when you get to this stage and you're almost done. It's a good idea to leave it till tomorrow, to come back and have a good look at it tomorrow and see where it's dried really light and what you need to put in the way of extra details. Or these gums here, I call them gums. They're like gums. They're around these sort of teeth things in the crusher claw is quite dark. Come around those with that reddy brown color. And put that in. So I would probably work on a few little details with this after it's all dry. There's things I've got to do, like I have to take the masking fluid off and see where I've got masking fluid. If I don't have masking fluid, then there's things I'd want to do, like with the white paint. Just getting a little bit of my Dr. P.H. Martin's white. There's little things like, I don't know if this is thin enough. There's kind of like little hairs either side of this piece in front of between the eyes. There's some little hairs, kind of good to put on. And if you've missed, if you haven't got masking fluid, there's some like little teeth type things here and there. You might need a few highlights on the body. I'm pretty sure mine are masked off. And you might want to just add a little bit of highlight along the claw where there's highlights. Oh, do you remember I missed doing the light blue. So I can come in with the white, and I can either mix the white with some blue, or I can put the white on first and then put some blue over the top, which will give me that light blue look. So I'm just putting a little bit of that white on, and then I'll come over with some light blue. I'm going to pull back a little bit so Mr. Lobster's floating in my sea there. And I really like that cobalt teal. So I'm going to come back with a little bit of that cobalt teal. And I'm going to add a little bit more, because when it dries, it really dries out to almost white. I'm going to add just a touch more in the blue shadows of the claws here where they're reflecting the light. And where I just put that white on, I can also put some cobalt teal over the top of that and get a nice light bluish sort of shadow to those highlights, like I see in the photo. Now that brown that we made is so easy to lift. If at any point after this is dry, you want to lift something, say you wanted to lift some highlight in the body, zoom in again, get a wet brush and just agitate a little bit, just like dab with the Kleenex, and see how easy it is to get some highlights on the top of the body if you want them. Very easy to do. If you've missed some mottling on these claws, just get a little tiny wet brush. In fact, if you want to do the mottling this way and not do it while you're painting, it's just as good. You get a lovely soft look to your mottling. You can just dab with your wet brush, dab with your Kleenex, and you can mottle after you've painted, because the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue will lift really easily. They won't stain your paper. So any highlights you want along the claw, you can just lift out. If there's a highlight, there's a big highlight here, lift out. That highlight is so bright, I would put that one in with white if I haven't masked it. I can just put that highlight in with some white there, this little claw, this area here. All lovely little highlights. The color just went all strange on my camera. Isn't that weird? Okay, so I think, how are you guys doing? I think I'm pretty much done. My lobster number 2. I'm going to be doing lobster number 3 tomorrow. Let's look at it alongside lobster number 1. See if I think lobster number 1 was a little bit more orange maybe. So if I felt that, especially if I felt that tomorrow, I could get my orange, and I could always orange up a few bits afterwards or tomorrow. I felt like I needed a bit more orange on Mr. Lobster or Mrs. Lobster, and it would be fine. Well, I hope you enjoyed painting this lobster today, and I think it was kind of a fun project. I've never tried something like this before. So we'll see you next week for another Canadian province. Bye for now.